My name is Avery Crane, and I was 34 the week my whole family decided I had stolen from them. My grandparents died on a Tuesday, in a small plane that never reached the wedding they were flying to. I found out from my brother, Trevor, who asked about the will before he asked if I was okay. 6 days later, their lawyer read it aloud, and every head in that room turned and looked at me like I was a thief. I thought the funeral was the hardest part. Then they came to the house with a moving truck, and a man I had never seen, and I understood the funeral had only been the beginning. What I had quietly done 2 days before that truck arrived is the only reason I can tell you this calmly now. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people meet impossible families and learn that the quietest person in the room is rarely the weakest. If a story about boundaries, dignity, and standing your ground speaks to you, you are in the right place. Drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. It was a little after 7 when the phone rang, and the wind-up clock in my hallway was still ticking its slow, patient tick. I almost let it go to voicemail. Trevor never called me. We texted twice a year, on birthdays, the way you wave at a neighbor you do not like. So I answered, and his voice came out wrong, flat and quick. "It's Grandma and Grandpa," he said. "Their plane went down outside Asheville." I sat down on the floor. I remember the cold of the boards through my jeans and the clock counting off seconds I could not feel. They had been flying to a friend's wedding, a couple they had known for 50 years. I asked if anyone had survived. He said no. Then, before I could breathe, before either of us had said a single soft word about the two people who raised half of my childhood, my brother asked the question that told me everything. "Hey," he said, "do you know if they left a will?" I did not answer. I just listened to him breathe, and to the clock ticking, and to the strange hollow space where grief was supposed to go. He filled it for me. He said the family would figure out the estate together. He said it the way you say a thing you have already practiced. I told him I had to go. I hung up and sat on that floor for a long time, and the only sound in my house was that old clock, the one Grandpa had taught me to wind when I was 9. I did not cry yet. I was already wondering what my family had been planning while my grandparents were still alive. The will was read on a gray Monday in the law office of Walter Halloran, 6 days after the crash. Walter was 71, slow-moving, with a handshake like a vice and eyes that did not miss much. He had served with my grandfather, a lifetime ago, in a war neither of them talked about. The whole family came in black. My father, Gerald, sat in the front with his arms crossed. My mother, Brenda, dabbed at eyes that stayed dry. Trevor jittered his leg. Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, sat one row back with a legal pad already open, like she had come to take inventory rather than mourn. I took the chair at the end, the way I always did at family gatherings, close to the door. Walter cleared his throat and put on his glasses. He thanked us for coming. He said Raymond and Joan Crane had been deliberate people and that their wishes were clear. Then he started reading, and the room held its breath. I expected the house to go to my father. I expected the savings to be split. I expected, honestly, to be mentioned somewhere near the bottom. A keepsake maybe. The clock, if I was lucky. Instead, Walter read my name. He read it again a paragraph later. He kept reading it. I felt the air change before I understood the words. My mother's pen stopped scratching. My father uncrossed his arms. Trevor's leg went still. Walter looked at me over his glasses, not unkindly, and then looked back down at the page like a man who knew exactly what he was about to set loose in that room. My mother laughed, one short, sharp note with no humor in it at all. "There must be a mistake," she said. Walter did not look up. "There is no mistake," he said. Walter set the page down and folded his hands. "Avery is the sole heir," he said. "The estate passes entirely to her." He let it sit. $40 million. The house on the lake. The land. The accounts I had never known existed. He said the numbers plainly, the way you read coordinates, and the room came apart in slow motion around me. My father said my name like a curse. My mother said "soul" 3 times, as if the word itself were broken. I did not say anything. I was thinking about the summers, about the dock I had repaired by hand at 14 while everyone else was at the club, about my grandmother teaching me to bake bread that never rose right and how she laughed every single time. Walter kept going. He explained that the will had been signed 2 years earlier in his office, witnessed by 2 people, recorded on video. He said there was a physician's letter confirming my grandparents were of sound mind on the day they signed. He said it twice, slowly, and I realized he was not telling me. He was telling the room. He was building a wall in front of me, brick by brick, while everyone watched. Then he looked at me directly. "There is also a letter," he said. "Handwritten. For you alone. Your grandmother asked that you read it when you were ready, and not before." I nodded. I did not trust my voice. Behind me, I could hear my mother and Carol whispering fast and low, the way you whisper when you are already drawing up a plan. My father stood, buttoned his coat, and walked out without looking at me. The door clicked shut. The clock on Walter's wall ticked, and I understood that the grief I had been waiting to feel was going to have to get in line. They were waiting for me in the parking lot. My father stood by his truck with his jaw set, and the gray sky pressed down on all of us. I tried to walk to my car. He stepped in front of me. "It should have gone to family," he said. I had been hearing the rough edges of that sentence my whole life, but never the whole thing, never out loud. I looked at him. "I am family," I said. My father's face did something complicated and then closed like a door. He turned away. That was always his answer to anything true, the turning away. Trevor came up beside him, hands in his pockets, that loose, entitled slouch he had carried since he was a teenager. "You don't even live here, Avery," he said. "You haven't lived here in 12 years. As if a house were a reward for staying close enough to want it. And in his mind, maybe it already was his. For as long as I could remember, the family had spoken of the lake house as Trevor's someday. The place he would raise his kids, an inheritance everyone agreed on without once asking the 2 people who actually owned it. I did not answer him either. There was nothing to say that they were ready to hear. My mother appeared last, and she did the most frightening thing of all. She softened. She put her hand on my arm and looked up at me with wet, careful eyes. "We're all grieving, sweetheart," she said. "We'll talk soon, when everyone's calmer." Her voice was gentle. Her grip was not. I had spent 4 years in the army learning to read what people meant under what they said, and what my mother meant was simple. She had not given up. She had only changed weapons. I got in my car. I sat there a moment, watching the 3 of them confer in the rearview mirror, heads close, my father gesturing toward the law office. Then I drove out to the lake, to the house that was somehow mine now, and I tried to remember how to breathe. I should tell you who I am, because it matters for what comes next. I spent 12 years in the army, most of it in logistics. People hear that and picture clipboards. And they are not wrong, but a clipboard in the wrong desert is the difference between men eating and men not eating. My job was to make sure the right things reached the right people at the right time, and to write down everything, because in that work memory is the first thing that betrays you. You document, you date it, you keep the file. After I got out, I did not go home. I took a small apartment 20 minutes from the lake and a job coordinating supply for a farmers' cooperative, and I kept to myself. I told people I valued my privacy. The truth was quieter and worse. I had grown up the spare child, the one whose graduation no one drove to see, the one my father once introduced to a neighbor as our house guest, and laughed like it was a joke. You learn, after enough of that, to stop reaching for people who keep their hands behind their backs. So I built a life that did not require them. The only place I had ever felt fully seen was the lake house, with 2 old people who asked me about my day and actually waited for the answer. Grandpa would hand me a wrench. Grandma would hand me a warm slice of that terrible bread. They never once made me prove I belonged. I told myself after the funeral that I had left that family behind years ago and felt nothing. The will had just proved I never really had. You cannot leave behind people who are still living rent-free in the part of you that flinches. I knew that the moment my mother's hand tightened on my arm, they were not done with me, and I was not as far away as I had pretended. The lake house was a low cedar place that my grandfather had built up over 40 years, room by room, the way some men build a life. I drove out the day after the reading to begin sorting their things, because someone had to, and because I could not stand the idea of strangers doing it. The water was doing its evening thing when I arrived, lapping against the dock pilings in that slow, patient rhythm I had fallen asleep to as a child. My grandmother's lavender was still blooming along the porch rail, gone a little wild without her. I stood there a long time and let the smell of it undo me. Inside, the house smelled like cedar and old coffee. The wind-up clock in the hall, Grandpa's clock, the twin of the one he had given me, ticked on, faithful, like it had not heard the news. I wound it the way he taught me. Then I walked the rooms and let myself cry, finally, the way I had not been able to in front of anyone. And somewhere between his workbench and her kitchen, I made a decision. I was not going to let this house become a thing they fought over from a distance. I was going to live in it. I would give up the apartment and move out here and be present, because presence is 9/10 of keeping anything. I started carrying boxes in from my car that very night. I was halfway through the third trip when I saw the slip of paper on the kitchen counter, folded once, in my mother's handwriting, slid under the door at some point that day while I was out. Short and flat, the way my family liked their cruelty, small enough to deny later. Family meeting Sunday. Be there. Not a question, not a condolence, an order, left in the house of the dead, in the home that was now legally mine. I set down the box I was holding and stood very still. I went to the Sunday meeting because avoiding it would only delay it, and because I wanted to see the shape of what they intended. It was held at my parents' house, in the formal dining room they used twice a year. They had set it up like a negotiation. My father at the head, my mother to his right. Trevor across from an empty chair they had left for me, far down the table, of course. Carol sat in the corner with her legal pad. They had clearly talked. My mother did the speaking. She laid it out gently, reasonably, the way you explain something to a slow child. The money would be managed by the family. A portion would clear the loan she and my father had taken for her real estate venture, the one no one mentioned at holidays. A portion would help Trevor and his pregnant wife with their new house. The lake house, she said, would naturally come to Trevor in time, for the children, and the rest would be set aside. She used that phrase like it meant something. Then she leaned forward and reached for the soft voice again. "Sign it over, Avery," she said. "Do the decent thing." There it was. The whole table looked at me, my father with cold certainty, Trevor with a kind of nervous greed, my mother with that wet, weaponized warmth. They expected me to fold. The old Avery would have, the house guest, the spare. I felt the pull of it even then, the deep family training that says peace is always worth more than your own ground. I sat with it for a moment. Then I said the only true thing I had. "I need to read a letter first." The room went absolutely still. My mother's smile faltered. "What letter?" she said. I stood and I buttoned my coat, the way my father had, and I left them sitting at their pretend negotiation with their pretend plan and the air going cold. The campaign started Monday. It came in soft, the way these things do, before it comes in hard. My phone lit up with messages from relatives I had not heard from in years. An aunt I barely knew sent a paragraph about how Grandma would have wanted the family whole. A cousin sent old photos of me as a child at the lake, captioned with crying faces, as if nostalgia were a lever. My mother sent a verse about generosity. Trevor sent a sonogram with a one-line caption, "Think about him." None of them asked how I was. All of them assumed I was the problem to be solved. I recognized the pattern because I had run logistics for people who applied pressure for a living, so I did what I always did when something felt off. I made a file. I screenshotted every message, dated it, dropped it in a folder, and I did not respond to any of them. I was not building a case yet. I want to be honest about that. I was not some chess master 10 moves ahead. I was a grieving woman who had learned, the hard way, that you do not win by reacting to people who want you reacting. You win by keeping your hands still and your records clean. I made coffee. I wound the clock. I carried more of my life out to the lake house, one trip at a time. And every evening I sat on the dock and listened to the water against the pilings and let myself feel exactly two things at once: the loss of two people who loved me, and the slow, cold certainty that the people who shared my blood were not going to stop until someone made them. I just did not yet know how loud they were willing to get. Carol called me on Thursday. Carol was a paralegal, which in my family made her something close to a general. She did not bother with warmth. "We wanted to give you a courtesy heads up," she said in the tone of a woman who had never given a courtesy in her life. "The family is prepared to challenge the will." I asked on what grounds. "Undue influence," she said. "Two vulnerable elderly people. One estranged granddaughter who swooped in at the end and walked away with everything. A jury sees that story very clearly." I almost laughed. I had not swooped in. I had been kept out. But I knew, even then, that the truth and what a contest could cost were two different things. A challenge could drag on for a year. It could bleed the estate dry in legal fees. It could turn my grandparents' careful wishes into a slow war. Carol was counting on that. She was counting on me being scared of the process. What she did not count on was that I had spent my whole career inside processes, and they did not frighten me the way they frightened other people. Then she made her mistake. She got impatient, and impatient people leak. "Look," she said, lowering her voice, "your mother needs this settled before the bank moves on her. So let's all be reasonable." She caught herself a half-second too late. Before the bank moved on her. I wrote it down. I thanked Carol for the courtesy heads up in a voice as flat as hers, and I hung up, and I sat with that one sentence for a long while. My mother was not just greedy. My mother was drowning, and drowning people do not let go. They pull you under with them. I called Walter the next morning. I did not call him crying. I called him the way I would call a supplier with a list. He answered on the second ring and listened to all of it without interrupting. The undue influence threat, Carol's slip about the bank, the Sunday meeting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Let me set your mind at ease," he said. He walked me through it slowly. The will was as solid as a will gets. He had drafted it himself. 2 disinterested witnesses. A video of the signing. A physician's letter dated the same day, confirming your grandparents understood exactly what they were doing. "An undue influence claim has to be proven," he said, "and the burden falls on them, not you. They have nothing but their feelings." I asked what they could really do. "They can file," he said. "They can make noise. They can spend their own money making noise." Then he paused. "There is something else you should know. Your grandfather added a clause, a no contest provision." I asked what that meant in plain words. "It means," Walter said, "that anyone who challenges this will and loses, forfeits whatever your grandparents did leave them." I sat up. "They left them something?" "A token," he said. 20,000 each, to your father, your mother, and your brother. Raymond insisted on it. He said it was a test. I wrote down every word. A test. My grandfather, dead in a field outside Asheville, had reached forward in time and laid a small, quiet trap, baited with exactly the kind of money my family could not leave alone. I did not feel triumphant. I felt something stranger. I felt understood. He had known them. He had known me. And he had trusted me to be patient enough to let it work. Before we hung up, I asked Walter the question I had been circling. Why me? Why not split it? Why not soften it? Why hand one grandchild a fortune and light a fire under the whole family? He was quiet again, the way he got when he was deciding how much to say. Your grandparents talked about you a great deal, he said finally, more than you'd guess. He told me they had noticed things. The graduation no one attended, the one Joan only heard about afterward and cried over. The phone calls where Gerald spoke about you like a problem he was tired of. The Thanksgiving you came home on leave, and your father called you a house guest, and you smiled and helped with the dishes anyway. They wrote it down, Walter said. Not to use against anyone. Joan kept a journal. Raymond kept letters. They wanted a record of what they'd seen, in case anyone ever claimed they hadn't seen it. I had not known any of that. I had spent years believing my grandparents simply had a soft spot for me, the way you have a soft spot for a stray. But they had been watching the whole time, and they had understood the shape of my family better than I had let myself understand it. There's the letter, too, Walter reminded me. Joan's letter. You haven't read it yet, have you? I admitted I had not. I told him the truth, which was that I was afraid of it. Some part of me was not ready to be loved on paper by two people who could no longer be hugged. Walter let that sit. Read it when you can, he said gently. She wrote it for the woman you are, not the girl they tried to make you. Then he wished me a good night, and the line went quiet, and the clock in the hall ticked on. They came to the lake on a Saturday, uninvited, while I was out at the cooperative. I came back to find my father's truck in the drive and the two of them, Gerald and Trevor, walking the property like assessors. They had a tape measure. They had a phone out, taking pictures of the dock, the boathouse, the view. They had walked straight through my grandmother's lavender to get a better angle, crushing a whole section of it into the dirt, and the broken smell of it hung in the air like something grieving. I parked and got out slowly. My father did not even have the grace to look caught. Just getting a sense of the place, he said, for valuation. I asked who had let them in. It's the family home, Avery. And there it was again, that word, family, used like a key that opened any door but mine. Trevor would not meet my eyes. He kept measuring. My father walked up onto the porch, my grandfather's porch, and stood there like he was already deciding what to tear down. It should have gone to family, he said, for the second time, quieter now, almost to himself, like a prayer he had worn smooth. I told them both, evenly, that they needed to leave. My father studied me for a moment, surprised, maybe, that the houseguest had a voice. Then he shrugged and walked to his truck. Trevor lingered. You don't even live here, he muttered. And then, glancing at the boxes of my things stacked in the front window, he flushed, because he could see that I did now. They drove off. I went inside, shaking a little, and on the kitchen counter where my mother's note had been, my father had left something new. A real estate agent's business card, propped up against the salt shaker, like a flag planted on land they had already decided was theirs. That night, I finally read the letter. It had been waiting in my grandmother's old Bible, the leather one she kept on the nightstand, folded once and pressed flat between the thin pages of the Psalms, exactly where Walter said she had tucked it. Her handwriting had gone shaky in her last years, but it was unmistakably hers, the same loops that had signed my birthday cards for 34 years. I sat on the edge of her bed and read it by the lamp, with the lavender smell drifting in through the open window and the clock ticking down the hall. She did not waste words. She told me she loved me, and then she told me why she trusted me, and the why was a list of small things I had forgotten I had done. You fixed the dock the summer you were 14, she wrote, by yourself, in 2 days, and you never once told anyone or asked for thanks. She wrote about how I sent them a card every single Christmas from wherever the army had me, even the years no one else remembered their anniversary. She wrote, "You are the only one who never asked us for a thing. That is how we knew." And then, near the bottom, the line that reached into my chest and stayed there. "Use it the way we'd be proud of," she wrote. "You'll know what that means. Don't let anyone tell you that family is the people who share your name. Family is the people who would never make you prove you belong." I read it 3 times. The first time I cried. The second time I understood it. The third time I felt something settle in me, hard and clear, like a load finding its center on a truck. They had not left me a fortune. They had left me a charge, And whatever I decided to do with $40 million, I knew now it was not going to be handed over to people who had walked through her lavender to measure the view. I folded the letter, put it back in the Psalms, and turned off the lamp. The next week, Walter and I sat in his office and walked the whole road ahead, step by step, the way I used to brief a supply route. He laid out probate like a map. The will would be filed and validated by the court. As sole heir, I would be required to notify the other potential heirs, which meant my family would get official notice whether they liked it or not. The estate would settle in stages, on the court schedule, not mine, and not theirs. The clock on his wall ticked while he talked, and I found it steadying. The process, I realized, was going to take exactly as long as it took, and no amount of shouting from my family could speed it or stop it. That was the thing they did not understand about people like me. They thought patience was weakness. I had learned that patience, applied correctly, is a weapon that never tires. I asked Walter the only question that mattered. If they filed their challenge, what should I do? Nothing dramatic, he said. You defend the will, which defends itself. And you let the no contest clause do its quiet work. I thought about it. If I begged them not to file, they would file. If I tried to buy peace by handing over a slice, I would betray my grandmother's letter and teach my family that pressure worked. But if I simply stood still, on solid legal ground, and let them charge at the wall my grandfather built, they would break themselves against it and forfeit even the token he had left. So I don't fight them, I said slowly. I just have to be as patient as the law is. Walter almost smiled. Your grandfather said something very close to that, he told me, the day he signed. They filed 11 days later. Carol drew it up, my mother pushed it forward, and my father signed his name to a petition claiming that his own parents had been manipulated by their granddaughter into betraying their only son. I got the notice the same day Walter did. I read it standing at the kitchen counter, and I felt a strange, sad calm. They had done it. They had walked straight into the wall, certain it was a door. The petition was full of words like isolation and vulnerability and suspicious timing, none of which survived contact with a video of two clear-eyed people signing in a lawyer's office while a physician stood by. But they did not know about the video, and they did not understand the clause. That afternoon, my mother sent me a message, and it was the softest one yet, which told me they thought the filing had given them leverage. We don't want this to get ugly, she wrote. Sign it over and we'll drop everything. We can all move on. Sign it over. Do the decent thing. The same sentence, dressed for a different season. I did not reply to her. I forwarded the message to Walter, dated it, and added it to the file. I want you to understand that I felt no joy in this. These were not strangers. The man who had signed that petition had carried me on his shoulders when I was small, before he decided I was a disappointment. The woman texting me about not getting ugly had braided my hair for school. But they had made their choice with open eyes, and the law was not going to make an exception for the fact that we shared a Thanksgiving table. I poured a cup of coffee, wound the clock, and waited. My mother came to the lake alone, 3 days after the filing, near dusk. I almost did not recognize her. The careful warmth was gone, and what was left was a tired woman in a coat too thin for the wind off the water. She did not knock so much as appear on the porch, and when I opened the door, her face was doing something I had never seen it do. It was afraid. "Can I sit?" she said. We sat on the porch steps, not touching, the lavender bruised and sweet between us. And she told me the truth finally, the whole shape of it. The real estate venture had failed. She had borrowed against her own house to fund it, certain the inheritance would cover the gap. The bank was moving to foreclose. "I'm going to lose everything, Avery," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word in a way that no performance could fake. For a moment I did not see a villain. I saw a frightened woman who had bet her whole life on money that was never hers, and lost. I felt the old pull, hard, the one that says fix it, make peace, give them what they want and the fear will stop. I let myself feel it, then I let it pass. "I'm sorry you're scared," I said. "I mean that. I'm not signing the house away. But sit down, and let's talk about what real help could look like." For 1 second, her eyes flickered with something like hope. Then she heard the part she did not want, the part where I kept my ground, and her face hardened back into the mother I knew. "You always did think you were better than us," she said, and she stood and walked to her car. 3 days later, the moving truck showed up. But before the truck, I have to tell you what I decided, because the decision is the whole point of this story, more than any reveal. After my mother drove off that night, I sat on the dock until the stars came out, and I read my grandmother's letter again from memory. "Use it the way we'd be proud of. You'll know what that means." And I did know. I had known, maybe since the first time Walter said the number out loud, and I thought about the dock and the bread and the 2 people who never once made me prove I belonged. I was not going to hoard $40 million, and I was certainly not going to hand it to people who would burn it clearing a bad loan and buying a bigger house. I was going to do the thing my grandparents had hinted at in every quiet kindness of their lives. I was going to build something, a foundation, a fund for veterans coming home to a town that did not always know what to do with them, and for the older folks in that town who could not fix their own roofs anymore, and for kids like the one I had been, who needed one place where someone waited for the answer when they asked how your day was. I would keep the lake house, not as a trophy, but as its home. My grandparents' porch would belong to the whole community they had loved quietly for 60 years. I made the decision on that dock, and I felt my grandfather's clock ticking faintly through the open window, counting it true. If my family wanted to know what I would do with $40 million, they were about to find out. So was the whole town. I did not wait for my family to make their next move. I made mine first. The morning after my mother's visit, I called Walter and told him I wanted everything locked down, properly, on the record. So we did the unglamorous work that wins things. We filed the will for probate the moment the waiting period allowed. Once the court admitted the will, Walter, as executor, recorded the transfer of the lake house, left to me by name, into my own name, with the county, so that the question of who had the right to it stopped being a feeling anyone could argue about and became a fact stamped by a clerk. We assembled the defense file against their petition, the signing video, the 2 witnesses' statements, the physician's letter, my grandmother's journal, my grandfather's dated notes. I made copies, then copies of the copies, and I kept a clean set in a folder I could carry in one hand. I had run supply convoys with less paperwork. Then I asked Walter the question I had been turning over since the real estate card appeared by my salt shaker. What happens if they try to force me out of the house? He took off his glasses. "Legally, the house is yours to hold," he said. "The will's admitted, the transfer's recorded, and either way, possession is yours while the estate settles. If they show up and try to remove you themselves, that isn't an eviction, Avery. There's no court order. There's no standing. It's trespass. And depending on how they do it, it's worse than that." I asked him to put that in writing, a clear cease and desist, ready to hand to anyone who needed reminding whose land they were standing on. He said he would have it ready within the week. I drove back out to the lake that evening, and for the first time since the crash, I slept all the way through the night. Not because I had won anything yet, because I had done my part, the way my grandparents had done theirs. And now all that was left was to let people show me exactly who they were. Trevor called me the night before everything came to a head, and for once he did not sound entitled. He sounded cornered. "Avery, please," he said, and the please landed strange in my ear, a word I could not remember him ever using with me. He told me what I had already half guessed. He and his wife had taken a loan, a real one, against the future. Because for years the whole family had told him the lake house would come to him for the kids, repeated at enough holidays that he had stopped hearing it as a wish and started hearing it as a deed. He had renovated their place. He had put down money he did not have on the strength of a promise that was never anyone's to make. "The baby's coming in 6 weeks," he said. "You don't even live here, Avery." But this time the old line came out small and frightened, not as an accusation, almost as a plea, as if reminding me I was a stranger here might make me feel guilty enough to fix his life. I felt for him. I did. He was 30 years old and he had built his future on a sentence other people handed him. "Trevor," I said, as gently as I could, "I never promised you this house." They did. They promised you something that was never theirs to give. He was quiet. I could hear his wife somewhere behind him. I told him there might be a path forward someday. A real one. But not like this. Not with a contest and a truck. He did not seem to hear that part. He heard only that I would not simply hand it over, and the line went cold. And then dead. I set the phone down. I knew then they were going to push it all the way to the wall my grandfather built, and I knew the wall would hold. I just hated that they were going to find out the hard way. The ultimatum arrived as a letter, hand-delivered in my father's blocky engineer's print. He had always preferred paper to conversation. It was short and certain, the way men are certain when they have never once been told no by their own family. I was to vacate the lake house by Sunday. If I did not, they would, in his words, remove you ourselves, and let the court sort it out afterward. He had it backward, of course. He thought possession was 9/10 of the law, and that if they simply put my things on the lawn and moved Trevor in, the courts would shrug and accept the new arrangement. He did not understand that a recorded deed does not care who is sleeping in the house. He did not understand that you cannot evict an owner. He ended the letter the way he ended everything, with the sentence he had worn down to a nub. It should have gone to family. Third time I had heard it, or read it, and it had stopped stinging somewhere around the second. It had become almost informative. Every time he said it, he told me exactly how small his idea of family was, how it had a fence around it, and how I had always been standing on the other side of that fence in his mind, no matter how many Christmas cards I sent. I read the letter twice and did not feel afraid. I felt the strange clarity I used to feel before a long operation, when the planning was done, and all that remained was execution. Sunday. They had named the day themselves. They had told me when they were coming, and how, and with what intentions. And they had no idea they had just handed me the one thing a logistics officer values above all others: advance notice. I did not plan a confrontation. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easy to make myself sound like a general laying an ambush. I planned a Sunday. I planned it the way I planned everything, by working backward from the moment that mattered and making sure the right things were in the right place at the right time. First, the documents. I made a clean folder, the recorded deed with the county stamp, the will, the signing video on a drive, the physician's letter, and Walter's cease and desist with my father's name already on it. Second, Walter himself. I called and asked if he would be willing to be present Sunday morning, not as a lawyer making a scene, but simply as the executor of the estate, standing where the executor had every right to stand. He said he would not miss it. Third, and this is the part I thought hardest about, I called the county sheriff's office. I did not ask them to arrest anyone. I told them the plain truth. That I was the recorded owner of a property, that family members had delivered a written threat to remove me by force on Sunday, and that I wanted a deputy present to keep the peace, because a crowd and a moving truck and a deed dispute was exactly the kind of thing that turned bad fast. The dispatcher took it seriously. She said a deputy would be there, and that was all. No trap, no trick, no clever speech rehearsed in the mirror. Just the law, quietly arranged to already be standing in my driveway when my family arrived to break it. I spent Saturday night cleaning the house and winding the clock and watering what was left of my grandmother's lavender. Then I made coffee for the morning, set the folder by the door, and went to bed. Sunday was coming. I intended to meet it standing up. I did not sleep much that last night, but it was not fear that kept me up. It was the house. I sat out on the dock past midnight with a blanket and a cold cup of coffee, and I let the place hold me one more time before whatever Sunday was going to be. The water moved against the pilings in the dark, That same patient lapping, the sound my grandfather said could teach a person everything they needed to know about persistence if they listened long enough. The lavender, what survived of it, breathed out its sweetness into the cool air. And through the open window behind me, I could just hear the clock ticking off the last hours, steady as a pulse. 3 things my grandparents had loved: the water, the flowers, the time. I had spent my childhood summers inside all 3 without knowing they were a kind of inheritance more real than any number Walter could read aloud. I thought about my grandmother's letter. I thought about my grandfather signing his quiet test 2 years before he died, trusting that one of us would have the patience to let it work. I thought about my father's fence, and which side of it I had always stood on, and how I had stopped, somewhere in the last few weeks, wanting to be let in. I did not need their gate. I had a whole lake. I am not a praying woman. I never learned how, and the army did not teach it. So that night I just listened to the water and let the clock do its work, and let the lavender say whatever lavender says. Around 3 I went inside and lay down. The folder was by the door. The coffee was ready. And Sunday, when it came gray and still over the water. They came at 9, in a small convoy, the way you arrive somewhere you have already decided you own. First my father's truck, then a rented moving truck, the big kind, its diesel engine rattling the morning quiet. Then my mother's car, and behind it Carol's, and behind that a cousin or 2 they had brought along as witnesses, the way you bring witnesses when you want a thing to look official. They parked across the grass without a thought for it. My father got out first and stood there surveying the property like a man arriving at a job site. Trevor climbed down from the moving truck, would not look at the house, would not look at me. My mother came up the lawn with her chin set, the fear from the porch steps packed away somewhere, replaced by the brittle certainty of a woman with no exits left. Carol had her legal pad. The cousins hung back by the cars, already uneasy. I was standing on my grandfather's porch with my coffee, in no particular hurry. My mother reached the bottom step and looked up at me, and she went straight to the sentence, because it had worked on me my whole life. "Sign it over, Avery," she said. "Do the decent thing." My father climbed the steps past her, right up onto the porch, walking through the last living stretch of my grandmother's lavender to get there, crushing it under his good Sunday shoes without a flicker of awareness. He stopped a foot from me, using his height the way he always had. "We're done waiting," he said. "Get your things." And I watched his face, ready to answer, when his eyes moved past me, toward the side of the house, toward the 2 people who had just stepped quietly out from around the corner where they had been waiting, and my father stopped talking. The whole front yard went still. Even the moving truck seemed to hold its breath. The first person to come around the corner was Walter Halloran, in his gray Sunday suit, moving slow and certain, the estate file under his arm. The second was a uniformed deputy from the county sheriff's office, hat on, thumbs in his belt, in no hurry at all. My father's mouth was still half open on the end of a sentence he never finished. My mother's hand went to her chest. Carol's pen stopped. I set my coffee down on the porch rail, picked up the folder I had left by the door, and walked down the steps to meet them on the grass, where everyone could see. I did not raise my voice. I have found that you almost never need to. "This is Walter, the executor of the estate," I said. "And this is Deputy Reyes, from the county. I asked them both to be here." Then I handed my father the folder. He did not take it, so I held it out until the silence made him. "That's the executor's deed to this house," I said. "Walter recorded it with the county once the court admitted the will. In my name. That's the will. That's the physician's letter, and that's a video of your parents signing, clear-eyed, in Walter's office." The deputy spoke then, easy and flat, the voice of a man who had broken up 100 of these. "This property's legally hers, folks," he said. "There's no court order here. Any attempt to remove her or her belongings is trespass, and I'll treat it that way. The truck needs to leave." But it was Walter who delivered the part that took the air out of all of them. He opened the file, slid out a single page and held it up so my father could see his own signature on the petition. "When you filed your challenge," Walter said almost gently, "you walked straight into the no contest clause Raymond built into this will. If you press it and lose, and you will lose, you have no evidence and a video that buries you. You forfeit every cent he set aside for you. A judge will speak the last word on it, Gerald. But you didn't put this estate in play at a hearing. You put it in play the day you signed this." My mother lunged for the page. The deputy's arm came up, unhurried, and stopped her cold. That was when my family came apart, all at once. The way a thing comes apart when the pressure it was built on suddenly has nowhere to go. My mother started screaming about lawyers and lies, her voice cracking up into a register I had never heard from her, all the careful warmth gone for good. My father went a deep, dangerous red and jabbed his finger at Walter, at me, at the deed, sputtering about ungrateful daughters and stolen birthrights. Trevor sat straight down on the porch steps and put his head in his hands. The cousins by the cars began edging back toward their vehicles, having signed up to witness a victory, not this. And I stood in the middle of all of it, perfectly still, holding the folder, and I felt nothing I had to perform. My father turned on me last, his voice ragged, and he reached for the only weapon he had ever needed. "It should have gone to family," he shouted. The fourth time, the last time, and in the quiet right after it, with the deputy beside me and the lavender crushed under his shoes and my grandfather's clock ticking faintly through the open window, I gave him the only answer I had been saving. "It did go to family," I said evenly. "You just could never see who that was." He had no reply. There was none to have. I told them then, the thing that I think hurt worst of all, because it was true, and because it was kind, and because kindness was the one thing they had never expected from the houseguest. I told them I had been ready to bring them in, that I had a plan that would have helped my mother with real guidance, helped Trevor stand on his own feet, honored the family in a way that would have lasted. "You could have had a sister," I told Trevor, not unkindly. "Instead, you brought a truck." Walter let the numbers do the rest, because numbers were the only language my family had ever fully trusted. He laid it out plainly, standing on the grass, while the deputy waited by the moving truck to make sure it left. The petition would almost certainly be dismissed. They had no evidence and a video that buried them. The legal fees they had already run up were theirs to pay, out of pockets that were not deep. And the no contest clause meant the $20,000 each that Raymond had left them. The small mercy he had folded into his test would be forfeit the moment a judge ruled against them, and every sign pointed to a judge ruling against them. They had come for $40 million, and they were leaving with less than they had walked in with. My mother heard the word foreclosure inside all of that, somewhere, and the fight went out of her between one breath and the next. She sat down on the bottom step near her son, and for a moment she was just the frightened woman from the porch again. "I'm going to lose the house," she said, to no one. And here is the part I have thought about most, in the months since. I did not gloat. I did not forgive. Exactly. But I did not gloat. I crouched down near her, and I said quietly, so the cousins could not hear, that I would not save the loan, because saving it would only teach everyone that the truck worked. But I gave her a name, a financial counselor, a real one, and the number for a county program that helped people restructure before the bank moved. "Mercy isn't money," I told her. "But it isn't nothing either." She did not thank me. I did not expect her to. The deputy nodded at the truck driver, and the big diesel coughed and started, and one by one my family got back in their cars and left the way they had come. The following week, I told the whole town what $40 million was for. I did it at the community center, the small one with the bad heating where my grandmother used to run the Christmas drive, and I did it plainly, because that was how Raymond and Joan had done everything. I announced the Crane Lake Foundation. The money would not sit in an account, and it would not buy me a bigger life. It would go to work. Scholarships for kids in a town that did not have many. Roof repairs and ramps for the older folks who had given that town 60 years and could not climb a ladder anymore. And most of all, a program for veterans coming home, the ones who came back to a place that loved them but did not always know how to reach them, the way no one had quite known how to reach me. The lake house would be the heart of it, not a museum, not a trophy. A place with an open door and a long table and a porch where someone would always wait for the answer when you said, "How was your day?" I hung my grandparents' photo back in the hallway, beside the clock, where Grandpa could keep his eye on the time and Grandma could keep her eye on the lavender I had spent a weekend coaxing back to life. People came up to me after. Some had known my grandparents. Some had only heard the story, the way small towns hear stories. A few of them cried. And through all of it, the old clock kept its steady, patient tick, the way it had through the crash and the reading and the truck, counting out a future my grandparents had reached forward 2 years to make sure I would have the patience to build. They had not left me a fortune. They had left me a charge. And I had finally figured out what it meant. The petition was dismissed 2 months later in a hearing that took less than an hour. My family did not contest the dismissal. There was nothing left to contest, and no money left to do it with. The no contest clause held exactly as my grandfather had designed it, and the small bequests passed instead into the foundation, which felt right, like the last piece of his test clicking shut. My mother lost her house that fall. I had warned her, and I had given her the name and the number, and she had used neither. And I made my peace a long time ago with the fact that some people would rather drown holding their pride than swim toward a hand they have decided to hate. My father I have not spoken to since the porch. I do not expect to. His fence was always going to be the thing he died behind, and I stopped trying to climb it the day I realized I had a whole lake. But Trevor surprised me. 3 weeks after the baby came, a boy, he sent me a message. Not a long one. Just, "I'm sorry." I looked at it for a while. I thought about the small, frightened pleas on the phone, and the way he could not look at the house, and how 30 years old is plenty old enough to know better and still young enough to learn. I did not write back a paragraph. I wrote, "When you're ready to mean it, you know where the lake is." I have not heard from him again yet, but the door is open, the way my grandmother taught me a door should be, neither locked nor flung wide, just unlatched for whoever is willing to do the work of walking through it. The foundation is real now, with a board and a budget and a roof crew that stays busy. The first veteran we placed in transitional housing finished his degree this spring. I still live in the lake house. I still wind the clock. And on summer evenings I sit out on the dock my grandmother wrote about, the one I fixed at 14 and never told anyone. And I listen to the water move against the pilings, slow and patient. And for the first time in my life, I do not feel like a house guest anywhere. The house is mine, the lake is mine, and no one, ever again, will make me prove I belong. I learned, the hard way and the lasting way, that family is not the people who share your blood or your name. Family is the people who would never once make you prove you belong. And the moment you understand that, you stop knocking on doors that were always going to stay shut, and you go build a house of your own with the door already open. That's my story. A plane that never landed, a truck that had to leave, and a letter folded inside an old Bible that told me exactly who I was when my own family had spent years telling me otherwise. If anyone has ever made you fight to be counted as their family, take this as your sign to stand quietly and firmly in your own worth. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.